Welcome to episode 331 of We Don't Die. I'm your host, Sandra Champlain, author of the international best-selling book called We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. A couple quick things before we start the show. If you're a longtime listener, thank you for your patience. As you know, the month of January 2020, we haven't recorded and aired any episodes, but I am alive and well. My mom and I own a catering business and we work with race car teams. So we spent most of the month of January at the Daytona International Speedway cooking for 1,000 people. So it's quite a lot of work, but I'm happy to say I'm home. And I've got a little bit of time off. So we've got more great episodes for you. We're starting a new thing. If you're familiar with the great mediums, Carrie McLeod and Philip Dykes, the newly married couple from Scotland, they and I are creating these online mediumship demonstrations. So it's as easy as going to a website. You'll be included into a live chat room via Zoom, it's called, and they will be doing mediumship readings on the people that are in the Zoom room. There's a small cost to it, $25, but it lasts about an hour and a half, and you get a copy of the recording after it's done. We've done 2 of them so far, and you can find out more at WeDon'tDieRadio.com. I figure this is an easy way for people to get medium readings and really get some evidence about the afterlife being real, what you witness in those rooms. And last, for 2020, we're creating some more We Don't Die events. Last year, 2019, we had We Don't Die Boston and We Don't Die Orlando. And just to give you a heads up, we are looking at venues for Seattle in June, Orlando in August, the Phoenix area in September, and even end of October, beginning of November, like a celebration We Don't Die cruise with some of our favorite guests. So that's what's on the horizon. If you are not on the mailing list, I recommend you go to WeDon'tDieRadio.com. There's a little pop-up that says join Sandra's Insiders Club, and that's the mailing list. And just to be sure to, I'll send you what's happening when everything gets sorted out, and then everything will also be on the website. Okay, I've done enough talking. Now we're going to meet our fabulous guest. Today on the show, we have Dr. Anne Charlotte Valentin, also known as Dr. Lotte. She's a physician, an author, an evidential medium, spiritual educator, and a speaker. She has experienced 2 near-death experiences, which led her to start medical school at the age of 54. She's the author of the book, Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul. Dr. Lotte teaches workshops in spiritual development, expanding consciousness, spiritual embodiment, as well as psychic and mediumship development. She lives in Phoenix, Arizona, where she operates Center for Integrative Medicine, as well as her spiritual center, Divine Spiritual Essence. You can find out more about her at drlotte.com. Dr. Lotte, a warm welcome to We Don't Die Radio.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on the show, Sandra.
Oh, thrilled. You're a woman that's done so much, and I'm so inspired by who you are and even what you're taking on now in life. Would you like to share a little bit about yourself? I just said we're going to do an event in Phoenix, and I thought, that might be a nice connection.
Right?
But tell us about you.
Right? Yeah, I've had a very turbulent kind of life. I came into the world and had a very easy childhood. I was the 4th child. I had 3 older brothers. And my father was a physician. My mom worked in the hospital as a hospital floor administrator. And being the 4th child, life was pretty easy. I had no beliefs in God, Jesus, religion. I was a complete atheist. I thought that when you die, everything just goes black and that's it. So after I had my 3rd child, I was about 33, 34 years old. I just turned 34. And I hemorrhaged after death, which means that you start bleeding out. And they did all, they did all the right things to help stop that bleeding. But what that eventually led to, I kept bleeding, going back to the ER. They kept sending me home, and I bled again. They saw a doctor. They kept sending me home. And On the fifth time I hemorrhaged, luckily I was in the emergency room. And that is when I had my first near-death experience, which of course changed my life forever, because I realized that, I started leaving my body and I was still there. I was still me. How could I be outside my body and still be me? This is not supposed to happen, because my belief system was that when you die, everything just goes black and that's it. So it really threw me for a loop.
Could you describe it a little bit more as to what it was like for you? There's many people, including myself, that are always fascinated in the world of NDEs, and I'm sure
Right?
you obviously you're going through something painful physically, but what was it like?
Yeah, so I'm bleeding out. I had blood clots that were the size of a baby's head. And this had been happening for 3 days now. Plus I had hemorrhaged after I gave birth. So I was becoming very anemic at this point. And when I was on the table in the ER, there was a nurse that opened the door to just randomly check on me. I was lying on this table and I started bleeding again. And I thought to myself, great, I'm finally starting to bleed. They're going to figure out something is actually wrong with me. And I can hear the call going through the loudspeaker in the hospital, a gynecologist to the ER, stat. You hear that call and you're lying there. And then this 50-year-old something man comes jogging in. And I'm thinking to myself, thank gosh, because now he's going to figure it out, because most of the physicians that had seen me were young and probably resident physicians. And so he started to examine me. And as he and the younger physician examined me, another large blood clot came out. And it was at this point that I knew something was very, very wrong. And I tried to sit up and tell the doctor, I said, I'm not feeling good. And he just pushed me back down onto the table, and the room just filled with people. And as I'm lying on the table, they start tipping it backwards to lower my head. So, to me, it felt like I was kind of upside down. But they're trying to move the blood back into your vital organs so that you're keeping blood in your brain and your heart. And while I'm lying there, I can feel them trying to put an IV in my left arm. And there was a nurse on my left that was trying to get the IV in. And then there was a nurse on my right that was quoting my blood pressure. And I'm feeling like I'm just falling, like you're jumped out of an airplane, kind of like a free fall feeling. And I can only relate that back to now, thinking that's probably was my blood pressure dropping in the beginning. And as I'm lying there and they keep tipping the bed back, the nurse on my right yells out, 50/15, hurry. And that was my blood pressure. And that's actually below what supports a heartbeat. And then the nurse on my left still trying to get the IV in. And it's shortly after this that I realize that I'm dying. And the realization that you're dying is very different from thinking that you're going to die, or being in a car accident, or almost getting run over or chased by a bear. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is it. I'm going to die. But when I was dying, it was a complete realization of the fact that I was dying. So here I am lying on this table with people working on me, trying to save my life. And what do? The atheist that I was at the time, I pray to God to save my life. Mm-hmm. And I'm lying there and I'm like, I have 3 children under the age of 6. I had a 6-year-old, a 3.5-year-old, and a newborn. I can't die. The children need me. They need a mother. And it was shortly after this that I started to leave my body. And I could just feel like I was floating out of my body. And it was as if I was hovering a few feet above my own body. But there was also a feeling of being attached to my body. It was as if I knew that I belonged, like I lived in that body. Kind of like, imagine living in a car for the rest of your life, like that's your home. Mm-hmm. It was as if my soul knew, or my spirit knew, that I belonged in that body. And when I was on the other side, I was just in the ER, and I didn't see the light until my second NDE. But when I was in this state, I had complete knowledge. It was as if I could access all information, past, present, and future, all at the same time. There was no time on the other side. And as I'm hovering above my body, they get the IV finally to come in, because when you're in that state, your veins start to collapse. And so that's why it was so hard for them to get the IV in. And as they get the IV in, I get sucked back into the body. And it was the feeling, if anybody has seen the movie Santa Claus, the original Santa Claus with Tim Allen, when he delivers presents and he goes through the chimney and he sort of gets sucked down the chimney.
Right.
And that is always the feeling that it comes to, because it was like a giant vacuum cleaner. It was this enormous force that just sucked me back into my body. And within a split second, like faster than anything I can even imagine, because it's so instantaneous that you get out of the body and then you get back into the body, that it is my little earthly brain can't comprehend that speed that things happen at. And then I was just sucked back into my body, and I was just, back in there. And it was, it just threw me for a loop, because how could you be outside your body and still be you when your body's down there? I did not believe in any of this. So
makes me the best messenger for this.
Right. Right. So it's kind of, it explains why my life has become what it is. So it took me a long time to come to terms with it, and I didn't dare telling anyone. I told, just a few people, like my husband, my mother-in-law, my best friend. And my mother-in-law said, you had something that's called a near-death experience. And she gave me, I think it was a Life After Life book that, one of the first books that came out, because this happened in 1992. So there weren't as many books on the market. And I was afraid of telling. The nurse in the hospital asked me if I had any, different kind of feelings or had, when they were saving my life. And I was so afraid of telling her anything, because I figured they're going to think I have a mental, disorder of some sort, because was my own belief, that people who thought that they could be outside their body, I would just say those people are crazy. Right. And that, because I came from that, I was a complete atheist. So then it was a long period of time. I got really sick. I was asleep basically for 3 months after this, and I was really sick. And then 6 to 9 months later, I started getting something called bone marrow suppression. And that is when your body is not making enough, red blood cells, white blood cells, or platelets, and you become very anemic. And I was covered in bruises, and I had this huge bruise that spanned my entire hip. And I had bumped into the baby's changing table, and it's something that would give you a bruise about the size of a dime, but it was a bruise that was probably 4 by 8 inches. It spanned my entire hip. Wow. And I kept getting sick. I kept getting pneumonia. So I knew something wasn't right. And then I went to the doctor. That was in May. My daughter was now 11 months. And he saw the bruise on my body and, of course, said, "Oh my gosh, something is really wrong with you." And I said, "I know something is really wrong. I understand, but I'm actually getting better." It was the very strange thing, because I had been so sick after my near-death experience. I said, "I actually put the children in the car and drove myself here, something I couldn't have done 6 months ago." And then I was really, really sick. I walked a fine line for like 5 years, and I would just get, bruises. I get pneumonia every 6 months, and I had a stool in my kitchen for 5 years because I couldn't stand up long enough to cook a dinner for my children.
You poor thing.
It was a struggle, but it was because of these experiences that everything happened, in my life later on. So as I'm going through this and I'm trying to process my near-death experience of how can you still be there, I'm also having so I'm sick and I'm having a lot of electrical interference. And I didn't know anything about the after effects that now are very well known. If you go to IANS, International Association of Near-Death Studies, IANS.org online, there's been, thousands of cases that they've documented, and they have research now that shows the different after effects that people experience that are very typical. And one of them is electrical interference. And what's meant about that is that some people will blow up light bulbs, and things like that. For me, it was the watches kept stopping. And that's a very common phenomenon. And I wore my watch for 5 days, it stopped. And this is when my daughter is about 9 months. And I finally had the strength that I could, park right outside a store and go inside to like a Target, which is popular here on the West Coast, which is like a Caldor's on the East Coast, and go to the watch department, pick out a watch, pay for it, and leave without, feeling like I was going to pass out. And after 5 days, the watch stopped. So I brought it back and I said, I don't know what's wrong with this, but it stopped. And they said, well, that's unusual. None of our other watches have come back, but go ahead and pick a new one. So I picked a new one. And after 5 days, it stopped. So then I said, wow, this is really weird. Something wrong with the quality control department or the manufacturing of this watch. Being scientific, right? So not thinking anything of what spirituality and the experience that I had could have possibly caused this to happen. So I bring the watch back again and she says, wow, this is very unusual, but go ahead and pick another watch. And I said, well, I'll pick a different brand this time. So make sure maybe they have problems with this particular watch. So I picked a different watch. I wear it for 5 days and it stops. So then I told one of my best friends who I trusted, because it's very hard to communicate these experiences when my own belief was that everybody's going to look at me and say I'm crazy.
Yes.
So I told her and she kind of looked at me and laughed and she said, honey, it's not the watch, it's you. So it was the first time I finally came to the realization that, wow, I'm causing this. And then there was this things, a lot of things that happened. The VCR wouldn't turn on. I tried to turn the VCR on for my kids to watch a movie, but I couldn't do it. I had to stand in the doorway and instruct my 6-year-old which button to push, because if I came close, it just wouldn't work. And then all these watches dying, the first year, it took me a year to have a watch tick 1 month. After 2 years, it ticked about 2 months. After 3 years, my watch ticked about 3 months. So when my daughter was 3, I had 16, 17 watches in my drawer, because sometimes they would start ticking again and I could wear it a couple of days, but then it would stop again. And I would get all my watches would have a second hand. So I would know if it was working or not, because it was the only way I could tell, because if it just stops, I wouldn't know if I was telling the right time. And I would walk by the television and it was right around my daughter's first birthday and it turned on. And I said, well, it must be my 6-year-old. He has the clicker. And I looked, no, he was outside playing with his brother and the neighbor kids. So I said, well, it could be one of the neighbors might have the same TV as I do. And then I went to ring 8 neighbors' doorbells to see if they had the same TV or if they were watching TV, and they pushed a clicker and somehow the signal would have gone through my living room window and hit my TV and turned it on. Nobody was home. Nobody was watching TV. I walk back in, I walk by the television, it turns back on.
That's crazy. You are one powerful woman. I know we're made up of energy, but I have not heard this part of the after effects. So this is wild.
It is really wild. And for me, it was, I was scared when that television turned on the second time. I said, oh my gosh, like, how can this happen? Mm-hmm. How could this be me? And I thought for a while, maybe it's a spirit in the room. Maybe my grandmother, she was always joking with me. But, after a while, I got used to this. And as the boys grew up and they got a Nintendo for Christmas, they were petrified I was going to ruin it. So every time I walked towards their room, they would say, hide the Nintendo, mom's coming.
Funny.
So it became a joke in the family, but it took 12 years for my watch to tick 12 months. And at that point I said, okay, this is it. I'm healed. But so it's during this time, I'm having all this electrical interference. I'm really sick. I've had people tell me that are mediums that read me and said, what happened to you at this age? Because it is as if you functioned at 20% life force. And I said, well, that's exactly what it felt like, because I was always struggling after this first near-death experience to keep my spirit inside the body. And I can't quite explain it, except that it was as if I was 2. You know how we go through life and we identify with our body as ourselves. Mm-hmm. So the way I feel today, right, because now I'm healed, it took 12 years to get over this. It is as my soul merged back into the body. But during this time, my soul was separate and there was 2 parts of me. It was my physical body and my soul body, and they weren't quite merged together. So if you think when you lay a puzzle and you're putting all these pieces in, but one piece is sticking up slightly in the puzzle and you kind of have to pat it to make it sink in and be flat with the rest of the puzzle pieces, it felt like that. So my soul wasn't merged all the way, just like the puzzle piece wouldn't be merged with the rest of the puzzle, creating a flat surface. the soul was separate. And during this time when I was this sick, it felt like my soul was always leaving. And I always felt like I would be putting, helping my kids with their jackets or something. And I would be, praying to the spirit world saying, I can't leave. I have to stay in my body. And this force that I was always feeling like I was pulling my soul back into my body. It's really the only way I can explain it. And it is during this time that I had my second near-death experience. So this is just my life. This happens several times a day. I'm just constantly on the edge of sort of feeling like I'm going to pass out and leave my body. Mm-hmm. But I was also very, very sick, right? At the same time. So I had very little blood in my body. I was getting sick all the time. I didn't have a good immune system, and I was very anemic all the time. So that in itself is going to create that feeling. But then on top of it, it was like a separation, like my soul wasn't all there, wasn't all merged with my body. So my second NDE happened in the middle of the night. So at night, for the first year, I could not keep my head on a pillow because every time I put my head on a pillow, it was too high up and my head would just pound because it was too little blood in my body. And so this is now, we are just, like 2 to 3 years later, this is happening, and I'm really sick, and I'm lying in bed at night, and all of a sudden, this happened to me many nights. I would wake up or, feel very faint, and I would take my head off the pillow so that I'd be flat on the bed, and then I would try to hold my soul back into my body, and this was just a common existence for me at this point. But this night, I couldn't hold it back anymore. And I just popped out of my body just like I did in the ER. But this time, it was different because I was traveling through this darkness. Now, a lot of people talk about going through a tunnel and seeing the light at the other end.
Right.
It wasn't like that for me. I just traveled through this darkness. And I get to this place, which I call the mid station, because somehow I was aware that there were levels above me and there were levels below me. But so I call it the mid station, just like when you go skiing, if you go to the top of the mountain or you go to the station in the middle of the mountain. Mm-hmm. And as I arrive at this station, I hear the most beautiful music you could ever imagine. More beautiful than any music. And I'm very musical. I played instrument, I played the guitar, I played the piano, I did voice lessons as a child and musical theater and all those kinds of things. And this music was different because the only way I could describe it for the person now that was an atheist was that it was angelic, right? It was the most beautiful, harpsichord, bells. There's nothing on earth that sort of sounds like the music I heard. Wow. So I look around and what do I see? And it's interesting to me what you see now that I've heard so many other stories. I saw two log cabins, little log cabins. And I always feel like what we're shown is what we are meant to see when we get to that stage is something that we can resonate with or something. The messages that we get is something that is important for our life development, right? Because people have such different experiences, what they see and who they meet.
Yes, and unique experiences for each one of us. Yes.
So I opened the door to this log cabin to my right, and I'm thinking the music must be coming from this log cabin. I look inside, and there's nothing there. So then I look to my left. There's another log cabin. So I open the door on that log cabin, and nothing is inside. So I look around and I say, where is this coming from? But then I become aware of this very bright white light that is behind me, and the music is coming from behind me. I don't have a body, right? Because I'm just in soul spirit form. But I turn around and I see, and I'm standing in the light. And this is the light that it is so magnificent. Again, it is nothing that you can experience on earth. The most beautiful pictures you sometimes see on the internet that you're looking into the sun, this very, very bright light. It's like that, but even more magnificent. It is, that you are standing for a better word, because I'm not religious and I don't associate with any religion, but it is as if you're standing in the God's light. That you come from this light you are touching God's source or source of all that is, because the light is so magnificent and it's just pure love that emanates from this light. But from this light, all the music was coming from or through this light. But when I looked at the light, it was an outline of angels within the light. I didn't believe in God. I didn't believe in angels, but this is what I'm seeing. And then I'm aware. So as I'm standing in this light, and it's the most magnificent feeling of love, and you could stay in this light forever because it is just so incredible. But then I become aware of a spirit guide. I don't see him, but I can hear him communicate, he or she or it. And he's communicating with another spirit guide. And he says, what is she doing here? She can't be here. She has to go back. And I say, wait a second. How can this be? Because now it's the second time I'm out of my body. And I have almost tried to discount the first NDE as if that was something crazy. It must have been something that happened in my brain. I don't understand how this can happen. Right. And so here is my second experience with understanding, being in the light, hearing the music. And then the guide he's communicating with, says, I say, wait a second, how can this be? How does this work? And the guide said, if I told you, you wouldn't remember. And now I've heard other stories, but this was back in 1994 now. And it is as if they can sort of control what we can remember. And this is what I've learned from listening to other people's stories. But I was told, if I told you, you're not going to remember, but you will remember this. And then it is almost like a movie screen appear. It is just images just appear in front of you. But it was as if I was standing on the moon and I was looking down on Earth. But around the Earth, it looked like a silvery, glittery fishnet. And I say that because I grew up in Sweden, in Scandinavia, that has, outside Stockholm is 24,000 islands. And every summer I lived on an island with no electricity or running water. And I would help my grandmother lay the nets in the ocean to catch fish so that we would eat. And when my grandmother lifted the net out of the ocean early in the morning when the sun's rising, when the sun shines on the fish net, it's sort of the water droplets sort of glitter. And so that was my association when he showed me this fishnet looking thing around the Earth, which now I know they refer to as the grid. But back then, this was the only association I had. And he said, everything on Earth is connected up to this grid, but everything on Earth is connected to each other. And that is the message that I got. And then I was sent back down into my body in the same slam dunk. I'm just sucked back in. Within the travel in and out of the body is so fast that I can't even comprehend it today, because it's kind of this instantaneous travel. It's like 1 second you're here and 1 second you're there. But now I've learned that this silvery, glittery fishnet that I called it around the Earth is called the grid. And I actually didn't learn about this until I was in medical school. This was in 2015. This is only about 3 years ago. And it was the first time I shared the true story of my near-death experience with my daughter, who at the time was 24. She's my youngest. She's now 27. Mm-hmm. And she looked at me and she said, Mom, what you're talking about is the grid. You can see pictures of it now on the internet. I almost fell out of my chair because, during my own journey of this, which was through the 1990s and the early 2000s, mm-hmm. the internet wasn't that developed. It was very difficult to find any information like this. And I went through the San Francisco Public Library because we lived in San Francisco Bay Area at the time. I read so many books trying to figure out what it was I had seen mm-hmm. and what that message actually meant. And it took me a long time to put all the pieces together. So now that it's been more than a quarter of a century is when I wrote my book, and I'm sharing this story and I'm sharing my journey, because many things came from this near-death experience, which is why I had to have it, because then I became clairvoyant and clairaudient and clairsentient, and I started hearing the spirit world, and I started seeing things before they happened.
Oh, I'd love to hear some about that. Because there are different after effects, and I know, you mentioned IANS, which is the International Association of Near-Death Studies. Anybody who's interested in near-death experiences, there's a wealth of information at ians.org. So
Right.
thank you for
I'm
sharing that.
actually speaking for them. I'm speaking in California on Saturday for IANS.
Excellent.
And if people want to see me, talk about my near-death experience and a little bit more in detail, they can go to ians.org and they can join via their webinar.
Oh, that's wonderful. And
Yeah,
people may be listening to this after that happens. So I think the webinars are
right,
still saved and
right.
recorded, and they can also find out at drlotte.com as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, there's going to be somebody listening in 2021.
Right, exactly.
But
Exactly.
talk to me about what started happening, or talk to us, that your clairvoyance and clairaudience and all that started happening. Because going from an atheist to having these experiences, and then I can just imagine all of a sudden you're seeing things in your mind's eye and hearing things and knowing things. And of course, the show's called We Don't Die. I mean, have there been deceased people that have come through? Would you share a little bit about that part of your journey?
Yeah. So, having had this experience, being, like you said, being an atheist, it really threw me for a loop. And I read so many books. That 12th year from 2003 to 2004, I read about a book a week for a year. I had stacks of books next to my bed. And I was trying to understand what was happening. And it was around 2000. Year 2000 was about 8 years out of my first near-death experience, 6 years out of my second near-death experience, that I really started seeing things and hearing things. And I didn't know how this could be. And so some of the stories that I tell when I speak for IANS, also these stories and more are in my book, is things that are verifiable. Because we sometimes, when we have experiences like this, we think, well, is it just my mind playing a trick? Am I having
Yes.
kind of a deja vu, right? And
Right.
so after a while, I talk about this in my book because anybody can become more intuitive. We just have to learn how to do it. And that's why I love teaching classes, because people are way more intuitive than I think they are. But what happened was I would start seeing things. And then one morning when I woke up, I had 3 slides being shown to me. The first slide was a big black scratch on the van door. We had a van at the time, so the passenger side where the kids typically climb in and out of the car, it had a big black scratch going across the entire door. Second slide was I saw 2 of the children in my car, one in the front seat, one in the back seat. And I knew it was my middle son and my youngest child, who was my daughter. And then the third slide, I see myself leaving a note on a black sedan car on the windshield about this accident. And those are the 3 slides I'm being shown. So I tell my kids, I said, I think we're going to be in an accident. I know we're going to be okay. None of us are hurt. And I'm leaving a note on this car, a black sedan car. But I don't understand where the driver is. If we're in an accident, where are the people? If they got hurt and were taken to the hospital, even though we're fine, that would have been, I should have seen like a police, but there were no people around. I just leave this note on the car, but I don't see any people. Mm-hmm. So I can't understand how this is. And then, well, the markings is on the door on the right-hand side of the car. So we figure out I must be turning left and I must have oncoming traffic in order for this accident to happen. So we go through, I'm driving my kids to the city every day because they're in school in the city. So we cross over from the East Bay area, across the Bay Bridge, and then we go into the city. And we figure out there's really only one point where we turn left. And we get off the Bay Bridge, we take the exit, we sit at the light, and then we jog left onto the surface streets. On that particular intersection, there is oncoming traffic. So every day we get to this intersection, my kids' noses are squeezed up against their windows, looking out, saying, Mom, the coast is clear. So I said, okay, so we turn left, and we do this for about 10 days. And we keep waiting. And, the kids are anxious because they're like, well, what's going on? They know that I've seen things before. They're familiar with me being clairvoyant at this point, right? Mm-hmm. So then we go to the little bookstore. We live in East Bay, and we go to the bookstore in Walnut Creek. East Bay, San Francisco. And when I come out of the bookstore, there's a big truck on my left that's offloading boxes. I'm trying to squeeze out to this very narrow little street. I'm squeezing right onto the street, and there's cars trying to get into the parking lot. As I squeeze myself out on the street, my car scrapes the car that's parked.
Oh.
And so of course the right hand side of my car scraped the left corner end of the parked car that's parked on the street. And at this point, I know, right? I know this is it. It's a black sedan car. So I get out of the car and I walk around and I see the scratch on my car, which looks exactly like the slide, and I lose it. I start laughing hysterically, with my arms up to the sky, and people are just looking at me. This woman is crazy. Like, she just, had an accident with this parked car, and she's just standing there laughing.
Mm-hmm.
But we were all so relieved that it was over, and, we weren't hurt. It was just some small material damage. And so here I am leaving the note on the windshield of the black sedan car. And of course, nobody was around because the car was parked.
Right. Makes sense.
Right. So this makes sense. So this was my life. It's just more and more things would come through. And I have many other stories that we probably won't have time to get through. But so what happened is I would start hearing things. I would start seeing things. I had a remote viewing once. I saw my children in the car in San Francisco while I'm in the kitchen in East Bay. I'm heading to the stove to prepare dinner. And all of a sudden I see my kids in the car. My son is driving. His girlfriend's in the front seat. My daughter's in the back seat. He makes a U-turn on the Embarcadero, which is down by the ferry building on the water. And he's waiting for the light to change to red. So he's waiting for the yellow so he can whip his car around and go down in the opposite direction. There is a truck that's coming on the other side, the oncoming traffic. But the light is turning yellow going to red. He thinks, my son, I can see him in the car, thinks that truck is going to stop. The truck accelerates. So my son starts driving through the intersection, whipping his car around, and the truck continues through on the yellow red light and misses my son's car literally by an inch. And I see this, even though I'm in my kitchen in East Bay, like a 35-minute drive away. I see this happening, and I see their car speeding off, and that they're safe. My heart was racing so fast, and I just threw my arms up in this air, saying, "Thank you, Spirit World. Thank you, God. Thank you, whoever you are that's up there, for letting my kids get away unharmed." And I just sat on my kitchen counter for 10 minutes to catch my breath. And this was, the kids didn't have cell phones or anything. There was no way of contacting them.
Right.
And then I waited for them to come home, 2 hours later. And I knew they were always really, really hungry because they grew up at the San Francisco Ballet School. So they trained literally 6 days a week. So I knew they were very hungry. So I just let them eat. And then after they finished, my daughter looks at me and she says, "Mom, we almost got hit by a truck." And I looked at them and I said, "Yeah, on the Embarcadero, making a U-turn." And their chins dropped.
I bet. Oh my gosh.
But it was the only time that I have ever seen, something happening in the distance like that. But I know they've done research on that, and they're, trying to figure out. And I always, when I meet people who are physicists, and I always ask them, "Can you explain how that happens? Like, how could you see something happen, in the distance like that?" So, but it's fascinating because we are so much more intuitive, and we have much greater capabilities than we give ourselves credit for.
Absolutely. And you say remote viewing. Yeah,
right.
Very, very real.
And this is how it led me to go to medical school, because I started hearing the spirit world. And I was in my living room, and this is, so my daughter was born 1992. So this is 2004. It was exactly 12 years after she was born. Mm-hmm. And I'm starting to think, I should go back, I should think about what I want to do when I go back to work. I was a programmer, a systems analyst in my youth. I worked for IBM in New York. And so I was very scientific. So you can understand why I was an atheist and having such a trouble trying to come to terms with what was going on with me. But I started hearing the spirit world, and I'm in my living room, and all of a sudden I'm aware of a spirit guide. And he says, "You have to become a doctor, and you have to combine East and West. You are to give healing and messages to the people, and you are to write 2 books. No, wait, 3. And I am communicating back saying, writing what? I don't know what to write about. I'm not a good writer. I never thought of myself as being a writer in the first place. Why would you tell me to write 2 books? No, wait, 3. And I was just looking at naturopathic medicine, and I was thinking, I can't go to medical school. This is way too risky. It costs too much money. But the message was very clear. And I was enrolled in pre-med classes literally within 2 weeks. And it wasn't until I started medical school when I was 54. I worked in the biotech industry for a while. I returned to work while the kids were teenagers and waited for them to, grow up and move on so that I could move to Phoenix, or that my husband and I could move to Phoenix so I could attend medical school. And then going through medical school, I met somebody at a conference who said, I have your mother with me. I'm a medium. And are you willing to, are you open to receive messages? And this is only in 2016. This is only 3 years ago. And this is so funny to me now. Even though I had all these crazy experiences, being the scientific type AAA personality that I have, I was skeptical. I looked at her. I had just met her, and she had a very important, big, career type of job. She's just very intelligent. And I said, well, she's not going to make it up. So I said, sure, just bring it on. And it was very obvious. I had never had a communication like this with a medium in my life. So I had no idea that you could, like, a spirit would just come in. Right. This was over 3 years ago. So evidence after evidence after evidence. And she was telling me things about my childhood in Sweden. She didn't even know where I had grown up. We had just met at this conference, right? She doesn't know anything about me. And she gives me evidence after evidence. And she keeps saying, your mom keeps telling me that you have to go to Arthur Findlay College. And I said, I can't go to Arthur Findlay College. I just graduated. Literally, I had just taken the board exams in August, and this is September 2016. I was still waiting to find out if I had passed my board examination, because you don't find out until like October 1st or something. Wow. It takes them a long time because it's a national test done in all different states at the same time, because so no cheating can happen. And so I said, I'm still waiting for my results. I just graduated. I got to do my residency, and I can't go to Arthur Findlay College in England and study mediumship. And they were adamant. So guess what happened? 6 months later, I was at Arthur Findlay College in England studying mediumship. And that is how now I've been there like 5 times in the past 2 years, and how my mediumship developed very, very quickly. Where I, now I'm at the point where I worked the Soul Summit conference in Scottsdale in September, which was the first big conference that I worked as a medium to help other people, bring in messages for other people. But when I received that message in my living room, you were to bring messages and healing to the people, I had no idea what they were talking about. And that actually did not click for me until about a year or a year and a half ago, when I was at Arthur Findlay College, and they keep talking about the messages. We're bringing messages from spirit. And all of a sudden it clicked to me and said, oh my gosh, that's what they meant. Because when I asked the spirit world, when they gave me the messages in my living room, that I had to go to medical school and write 2 books, no wait 3, and bring messages, it didn't make any sense. And when I said, what do you mean messages? Write books about what? And the answer was just, we will tell you when the time is right. Don't worry about it. Like, just go to medical school. That's your first step. You have to be a doctor. And this is how my life was. So here I am in medical school. I'm like, hello, spirit world. I'm in medical school. Can you give me the seconds? Can you give me the next step? What is supposed to happen? When the time is right, we will give you the next step. And that next step wasn't until I had graduated. And then I rapidly developed into this evidential medium. And now I'm able to bring messages of healing and hope to other people. But also, it does affect like how I practice as a physician, because there are times when you're doing things because the spirit world is kind of nudging you, saying, you should do this x-ray, even though you can't hear anything while you're listening to this person's lungs. something is up and you should do an x-ray anyway. And the spirit world sometimes come in and give you these messages, right? So it's interesting because you think of how many times, not just me, but I think many other healers and doctors also are quite intuitive, and that's why they become healers or physicians, because they have this capacity, and we use these intuitive capabilities in our daily life. So I love to teach other people how to become more intuitive and how they can themselves sometimes connect with the spirit world, and just by becoming more aware to their own surroundings and their own abilities.
How do you find time to do it all? I'm just left with this. You do so much, and it really seems, Lotte, that you have been groomed every step of the way. Like you couldn't have just had all of this in one near-death experience and opened up. Like there are little hints, little steps until you're ready, like a foundation was being built. And I mean, you're really up to so much. And I think you're such an inspiration.
Thank you. Yeah, it is true, right? I feel that like I was guided through my life because this is my life. But the truth is we all have paths. We are all on our own path. And I talk about this in my book because my book is really about helping other people find that trust within themselves, finding out how intuitive they really are if they just listen. Because we're all connected, we're all one. It's just one big consciousness, right? And we feed off each other. It's just like when you go into a room full of people that are mad, they're mad just by taking one step into that room because you feel the energy. It's the same thing when you teach people to move from the mind to the heart and listen to the heart. What does your heart tell you? Ask your heart, is this the right decision? The heart always know what is right. And we train and resonate with other creatures, whether they have a heart or not. We resonate and train with other people because we have electromagnetic fields in our body, right? We have electricity. That's how we do an EKG. That's how we do different scans.
Mm-hmm.
We measure the electricity and the waves of electricity. So when we heal ourselves and we heal our own heart, we also heal those that come in contact with us by giving ourselves the love that we need. And this is very difficult for people. So I often give affirmations to my patients, and I also take people through all these things in my book. How when you put your hand on your heart, look in that mirror in your bathroom in the morning, put your hand on your heart and tell yourself, I love myself. It is something that is much harder than you think for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And my patients sometimes come back and I say, how's it going with your affirmations? And they look at me and they said, it's so hard. Like, how could I, say I love myself? We are so busy in our lives taking care of everybody else and doing the right thing. And we're raised to, not put ourselves first and take care of the other people. But it's very important to love yourself and allow yourself that healing in your own heart in order to love and give healing to others. Because when you do that and you create that gratitude within yourself, your frequency, your heart is changing and you resonate differently and people will entrain with you differently. Just like when you have a healer and he puts you put your hands on them. And I do healing sessions with people too. You create that resonance between the person that's sick and between yourself because you're sending that frequency. And they've done studies with that where they actually measure the healing frequency that comes from healers' hands. And it's a specific hertz frequency. And now we actually use this in modern medicine. So if you have like a stress fracture, let's say you were in a skiing accident, you broke your leg, they actually put this little mechanism, a little pack on your leg where you broke your bone that emanates a certain frequency that helps heal the bone faster. I believe it's the same healing frequency that comes off healers' hands. So it's very interesting to see how the old and the new is sort of merging, right? Because we have these capacities within ourselves because we are amazing beings that, creatures that live here on earth that are much more divine and interconnected with everything that is than we give credit for, because most people are probably like me. They come, they're scientific and they want proof.
Right.
I would say, prove it to me. Prove it to me that you're talking to my mom. What can you tell that you could not have Googled or guessed, right, about me? Give me something specific that shows that you're talking to my mom. But going to Arthur Findlay and becoming an evidential medium, now I do this for other people. I say, I have your grandfather with me. He lived on an Air Force base. He is wearing a suit. He met your grandmother at the Air Force base, but your grandmother didn't live on the Air Force base. She came in on a bus to attend a dance, but that's how she met your grandfather. Is that correct? Right?
That's pretty specific.
Right. So there's sometimes very, very specific. And some of these readings you just remember because they're so detailed and you can still see them. And it's very interesting because this evidential mediumship proves that you exist after you die. You are just changing the state of your existence. The truth is that heaven is literally right next to us. That's how I look at it. Because when you jump out of your body, you're still there, but now you exist in a different state, and you're not bothered by your crazy ego that tells you and drives you to do all the crazy things that people do in life. And we're all stuck with our egos in our bodies in our life, and we do things that are right and we do things that are wrong.
Right.
And that's just our life experience, right? Everything has a yin and yang, everything has an opposite, and we have to experience different things in the dualistic world that we live in order to have our soul and to develop our soul and grow on our journey. So
really
it is
great words, Dr. Lotte. I'm thinking you were at the Soul Summit, and I know there was a fellow there from Heart Math Institute, and I interviewed him on my show, and just talking about how through love and through gratitude, it could actually measure our frequency. And I don't know all the words with the hertz and all that stuff, but
right.
how it all emanates from us. And then also, I remember studying with the medium, and the only piece of advice and training she gave us to do a medium reading was look at the person across from you and love them. And then tell them whatever comes up into your mind or your hearing or anything like that. So through the power of love, suddenly it was like popcorn popping with these details.
Right.
And love
Absolutely.
is powerful.
Yeah. Love is so important. I look at the light, the light, I stood in that light. The light is really just, it's love. We are loved, right? We come from this light that is love. And it's just we have to learn to feel, gratitude in our heart and love ourselves in order to love other people. It's all about love in the end.
Yeah, it sure is. I'd like, time goes by really quick if you haven't noticed, but would you talk a little bit about your Center for Integrative Medicine and also your Divine Spiritual Essence Spiritual Center? Because you're still practicing as a physician, I would think.
Yes.
Okay, and a medium,
so my time is
and
sort
a
of
teacher.
Splits between the two, right? So I work as a physician 2.5 days a week, and then the other 2.5 days a week I do other things, do reading, evidential readings, psychic readings, teach workshops, and then also develop different kinds of workshops. So I have one workshop coming up not this Saturday, but next Saturday, the 15th, here in Phoenix, and that is a psychic development. It's a 1-day workshop. And that I like when people take the psychic development workshop before they take the mediumship workshop, but they don't have to. Many times I have people just come straight into the mediumship, but sometimes it's good to do the psychic workshop first, because you learn to read other people. And I love how people always do so well, and they don't know anything about, how to read somebody else and the different exercises. You sort of feel like you're just playing all day, because you do these different exercises that makes you aware of your different intuitive capabilities and what you can use to read a person that's sitting across from you. And you just, like you said, you trust. Sometimes people hear things, sometimes they see things, or they, depending on how they learn to pick different things up. And then in March 7th, I'm teaching mediumship. And that's when we learn how to connect with spirit guides and the spirit world itself. And that's also it's a technique. And the first time I went to Arthur Findlay, and I was still a skeptic, right? This was in the spring of 2017. And I'm sitting, across from somebody that's from somewhere in the world. I have no idea, because you're about 12 or 14 people in the class. People come from all over the world. I couldn't even guess, right? Because they could come from South Africa or Australia or Switzerland. I have no idea. And it was very interesting, even though it was my first time, and how much information I was able to get from the spirit world. And people do really well, even though they think they can't do it. And that's what I just love it, because people are way more intuitive and spiritual than they think they are. They just like me, even though I had those near-death experiences, I didn't know how to bring in a spirit until I trained, until the teachers taught me, this is what you do. Now you do this. Now you do that. Okay. You know what I'm saying? And you get help to, how do you communicate stronger? Well, he's showing me he's educated. And the teacher says, how do you know? And I said, because they always show me books. I see books. And then I see a library. And then I know that they were educated. So, but then, there's different tricks that they teach you. So you see books, and then the teacher says, pull the books closer to you. What's the title of the book? Can you read the title?
Yes, right.
All right. And so, but these are things that when you're learning, you don't quite know how to approach it, or how do I bring in a spirit? So I do that. I do readings online as well. I do Skype readings for evidential readings and psychic readings. And then I work in my clinic 2.5 days a week, which is the Center for Integrative Medicine. I'm a family practitioner, and I'm a naturopathic physician, which means we are not yet part of the insurance system. So it's, people see me outside the insurance system, but it's amazing because I typically get people who have seen many different doctors and they haven't been able to solve the problem, because our medical, even though my own father was a physician, though he was a physician in Europe, my brother is a surgeon. I was always around doctors growing up, and what we have created in our society, I look at it like the McDonald's approach. Like, you go to the doctor, you see him for 2 minutes, and then you're out of there. How could you solve a person's complicated problem? They're on 5 different medications. They have 5 different things going on. What's causing what, and what is the side effect now from the medication versus what the problem is. So you have to untangle all of that. But being a family practitioner, I see everything pretty much from A to Z. I have postgraduate education in bioidentical hormones. So I work a lot with women in menopause or menstrual problems, because I have that specific education. And then I also work a lot with thyroid, digestive problems, which are rampant in our society. Sometimes get referred from the gastroenterologist because there's nothing wrong, with their colon or with their digestion. There's no physical problems, but they're still having digestive issues, and they can't digest, or they're having diarrhea, or whatever their problem is. And so I get a lot of that. So thyroid, digestion, and hormonal problems, female problems, autoimmune disorders, chronic disorders, arthritis, you name it. It's, migraine headaches. It could be anything. But it is very interesting now that I have education in bioidentical hormones to learn about the difference of the hormones, because people are confused all the time. And sometimes even research articles are confused, which is interesting. Doctors themselves are often confused. I have so many patients that come in, they're on hormones, and I ask them, when was the last time they tested you? Oh, nobody's tested me. How long have you been on the hormones? Like 4 or 5 years. And I look at the dose, and I already know that they're way over medicated. They're filling up with estrogen. The estrogen is converting, or they're filling up with testosterone. Now they're, changing that, because your body has all these different pathways, and it'll convert things as it seems, it needs to.
Right.
So you could have high testosterone, but because you have too much testosterone, now you have too much estrogen, because your body said, oh, I have too much testosterone, so I'm going to convert it to some estrogen. So even, giving men testosterone, you have to be careful because some of them will convert it to estrogen and then they'll start growing breasts and they wonder what's happening.
Oh my.
So, right. So but people there's a kind of a little bit of a disconnect from the doctors that went to medical school 20, 30 years ago versus those of us that graduated recently and have this education in bioidentical hormones, which is very different from the hormones you get at like a CVS or like a regular pharmacy, and they actually work differently in the body. But you have to really understand the difference when you deal with those concepts, because many times the doctors themselves are confused about what it is. So progesterone is a natural bioidentical hormone. Progestin is a synthetic, and they work very differently in the body. So, but even doctors themselves sometimes confuse the two, and they'll say, oh no, it's progesterone, but it's not. The patient's getting progestin, which is synthetic. So
you are so passionate about what you do. I applaud you. Dr. Lotte, have you found that your intuition kicks in when you see a patient for something physical?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it does.
So.
I've had cases I talked about a little bit before. The spirit guy comes in and says, do that chest x-ray, even though there is no reason really to do it because the lungs are completely clear. And then something actually does show up anyway. So there are times when I think that when you hear things or see, you're not going to get that with every patient. You're only going to get it when you're supposed to, because that's just how the spirit world is. It's just, you can't control what spirit is going to come in. The spirit world decides who's going to come in, right? And give that person the message. You might think, I want my mom to come in, but you know what? The truth is that you're going to listen way more to your uncle if your uncle gives you this message. See what I'm saying? So this is my understanding of from training in England with top mediums in the world, that it's difficult for us to control. We can ask for a specific spirit, but it doesn't mean that spirit will actually come in. And I feel it's the same when you're working as a physician. If I'm meant to get a message, I'm going to get the message. But if I'm not meant to interfere in this person's life, then it's not going to happen. Right? Yeah. So if I'm supposed to find it, I'm going to get a message, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to listen to it because I know to listen to my messages. They're never wrong. They have not been wrong in 27 years, and they're not going to be wrong now. So if I get a message saying, do that ultrasound, do that blood test, do that x-ray, I'm going to do it, whether it's warranted or not, because if that's what they tell me, there's something there. But, sometimes you're not supposed to interfere because this is the life journey, and we're not supposed to change that. This is the path. Do we come in with a contract or not? And how much is a contract and how much is not a contract?
Right. This is the journey of our souls,
right,
which is the subtitle of your book, Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul. Dr. Lotte, in your book, do you give any advice to your readers about life?
About
life, about their soul?
Yes.
Okay.
Literally the whole book is about helping other people find their life.
That's beautiful.
Right. How did they how did they find their intuition in their own life? It's really an inspirational story about transformation, healing, and spirituality that will help people create peace and happiness in their own mind, heart, and soul. So every chapter has an exercise and a message after it. Why did I tell you the story about my own life? And it's funny stories, stories about my NDE, stories about how I became clairvoyant and clairaudient and clairsentient, and then I became a medium, and all these different things happen. The title of the book is Med School After Menopause because it's to entice people to say, wow, my life is not over because I hit menopause. No, your life is starting now. You just hit menopause. Now, fix your hormones and then move on and go through the rest of your life. Because when you think about it, I mean, are we all going to be 100 years old? When you're 50, you haven't barely even lived half your adult life because you're not an adult until you're 21. So deduct that from being 50, right? Mm-hmm. Now you're really only 29.
I like how you're saying this because I'm 50.
Right?
4.
Because it's true. Because we're only in our 50s. Jesus, you're gonna have, maybe you have 50 more years to live. Are you just gonna go and do the same thing and the same job that you're now so tired of, or are you actually going to change your life? And how do you change your life? And that is a process. And so that is the process that I take the people through in the book, by telling different stories of my own life, and how changing that lens of how you're viewing your life, because we all view our life through a lens, right? But if you can change the filter on your lens, now you're going to have a different experience. So how do you change the filter on your lens? Well, you read my book, and then you go through, and the exercises at the end of each chapter are very easy. Something that takes you 5 minutes or less, but it's also to create, to have people reflect, right? I want them to reflect on their own life. And so they can say, what do I like about my life? And what don't I like? And how do I change the part that I don't like? That's really what the book is about.
Oh, great. We're approaching the end of our episode. Could you give us just one piece of advice or something you'd like to share before we wrap it up? Because I know you've left me very inspired and interested in, it's easy to forget that we're souls having a human experience. And you
Right?
definitely brought back the world of the magical to me, and that our spirit guides are around us and our loved ones. But is there a message you'd like to leave to our listener?
Sure. I would say there's a couple of lessons from my NDE. One is that we come from light. We are light. We return to the light. Light is love. We are loved, and we are love. And the best thing you can do is learn to love yourself. Because once you love yourself, everything changes. And when everything changes, the way you perceive life, you, to a certain extent, create your own reality based on this filter that you have in your lens, on your pretend glasses. Because once you change the filter on your lens, you're going to have a different experience. So if you can create gratitude in your heart instead of being mad, so the person cuts you off in traffic and now you're swearing at this person, how dare you cut me off in traffic? Instead, create gratitude and turn that around and said, oh, thank you. I am so grateful that this man did not cause me to be in an accident. He's having a bad day and he's not driving safe, but I'm very grateful that I'm unharmed and I'm now continuing on my journey. So you can always turn every situation around and find the gratitude, right? So once you find the gratitude in your life and you find the love in your heart, everything is going to start changing. And then never forget that life can be taken away in a split second. And it's when you least expect it, all of a sudden you might find yourself in that predicament of, now my life is taken away. So always live every day like it's your last. Never push things out. Oh, I'm going to do that next week, or I'm going to take a vacation when I turn 65. Take that vacation now. You might not be alive when you're 65. You're going to make more money. Things will happen. You're going to have another vacation when you're 65. Just live each day like it is your last. And always remember that everything is connected. We are all connected. Everything is all one. Everything is all divine. And so are you.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Lotte, for being our guest today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Time goes by fast. And for our listener, she's got a very easy website to remember, drlotte.com. It's just drlotte.com. Easy to remember. And also, you had mentioned earlier, the message you got, when the time is right, we'll get you to the next step. I think for all of us to remember where we're at is perfect. And we're
absolutely
surrounded by love. And when it's time for your next step, you'll get it. Wow. Well, thank you for being our guest again. And maybe when I'm in Phoenix next, we can meet up. I think that would be great. And I'm really proud of all the work you're doing in so many different ways, Dr. Lotte, helping people.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yes, do let me know when you're going to be in Phoenix.
No, I definitely. And to our listener, thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode. It's hard to believe this is episode 331. I mean, that's crazy. Where did the years go? As a reminder, all the past episodes are on YouTube. They're also at WeDon'tDieRadio.com. Yes, you can scroll through 300 of them and pick one that you want to listen to. I encourage you to go to ians.org. And if you're interested in near-death experiences, they are, I don't want to say the masters, but they have the biggest congregation, I'll say, of worldwide support, and they have support groups all over the world about near-death experiences. It's just wonderful. As a reminder, on WeDon'tDieRadio.com, if you join the Insiders Club, yes, that's the mailing list, but it says you can read a few chapters from my book, We Don't Die. It's actually the whole book. I want to empower you to live a great life and give you everything I know about life after death. There's also a very healing audio called How to Survive Grief. And again, we're starting these online monthly mediumship demonstrations. I think if you'd like to join us for one, you would really enjoy it. They're just spectacular. If you're a Facebook friend, you can go to, just type in We Don't Die Listeners, and we have a group of over 4,000 wonderful people who, this is what we talk about. We talk about life after death. We talk about healing from grief. We talk about being immortal souls and how to live a powerful life. So while we might not have people that we see face to face that buy into this, or they might think we're a little crazy, there is support around the world of people just like you and I. So I hope to meet you face to face, or be reunited with some of you face to face at one of the events coming up in the future. So in closing, my name is Sandra Champlain. I've been your host on We Don't Die Radio. I do believe that life is an education for the soul, and that your life here on earth is important. Remember to love yourself, look in the mirror, take Dr. Lotte's advice, and really be present and search for things that you're interested in this world. And don't be surprised if all of a sudden great ideas come to you, the voices start talking to you in your head in a good way, and you're given the next step on your journey. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.